In the rolling hills of Tennessee in the year 1838, a quiet unease seemed to linger in the air, as if the land itself knew of a secret too terrible to speak aloud. The townspeople of the nearby villages often whispered about a mansion perched atop a steep hill, surrounded by ancient oaks whose gnarled roots twisted deep into the earth like dark fingers. It was a house unlike any other, grand yet foreboding, elegant yet decayed, its windows reflecting the light of day in a way that seemed unnatural, almost otherworldly. It was there that the 7 sisters lived, though few could claim to have truly seen them. For the sisters were unlike anyone the villagers had ever known. They were beautiful beyond measure, their features delicate and symmetrical, their hair flowing like rivers of silk, their eyes shimmering with a light that seemed almost unholy. And yet, despite the passage of years, despite the seasons turning and the village children growing into adults, the sisters remained exactly as they had been for as long as anyone could remember. They never aged, and that simple fact was enough to ignite fear and fascination in equal measure. The first tales of the sisters had emerged years before, passed down in whispers from one terrified villager to another. Children dared one another to approach the gates of the mansion at night, only to return with tales of glowing candlelight behind the windows and the faint sound of laughter that carried on the wind, light and melodic, yet tinged with something sinister. Parents forbade such daring excursions, warning their children that those who lingered too long near the mansion would be cursed, never to return as they once were. And yet, curiosity is a powerful force. The brave or the foolish could not resist the pull of the unknown. Some swore they had glimpsed the sisters walking in the gardens under the moonlight, their long dresses flowing around them as if the air itself obeyed their movements. Others claimed to have seen shadows move across the walls of the mansion in ways that defied explanation, the darkness forming shapes that were almost human yet impossibly distorted. No one who truly ventured close to the mansion left unchanged, and the few who spoke of what they had seen did so with hushed voices and trembling hands. The mansion itself seemed alive, as though it were a creature observing those who dared approach. Its gates, wrought from black iron and etched with intricate patterns, bore strange symbols that no scholar could decipher. Vines crawled along the sides of the building, twisting around broken windows and crumbling columns, yet the structure remained impossibly intact, untouched by time or weather. At night, the mansion appeared to glow faintly, as if some internal fire burned within its walls. Locals said that the light was not from candle or lantern, but something else entirely, something unnatural that no mortal flame could produce. The closer one came to the mansion, the heavier the air seemed to grow, thick with a tension that pressed upon the chest and made every step forward an act of courage. The sisters themselves were creatures of myth. Each one possessed a beauty so precise and flawless that it inspired awe in some and terror in others. The eldest, whom villagers called Isabel, was said to move with the grace of a shadow, silent yet commanding. Her hair was black as midnight, her eyes a piercing silver that seemed to look through a person's soul. The second sister, Lillian, was rumored to have hair the color of spun gold, her laughter ringing like crystal in the night, though those who heard it later claimed it held a sharpness, a subtle cruelty that lingered in the ears long after she had gone. Margaret, the third, carried a calmness that was almost hypnotic, a presence that could soothe fear yet chill the heart simultaneously. The remaining 4 sisters were no less striking, each radiating a singular, unforgettable presence that seemed to warp reality around them. And yet, no matter how many years passed, they did not age. Children who had once peered through the gate and been struck with fear eventually grew into adults. Yet when they glanced back at the mansion, the sisters remained as they had always been, their faces untouched by time, their bodies unmarked by years or suffering. Rumors spread of how the sisters maintained their eternal youth. Some whispered that they had discovered a hidden spring deep in the forest, its waters imbued with unnatural powers, granting life and beauty in exchange for something unspoken. Others claimed that the sisters had made a pact with dark forces, a contract written in blood and sealed with the souls of the unwary. Travelers who dared question the sisters directly often returned, changed, their hair turning grey overnight, their eyes hollow and haunted. Some disappeared entirely, leaving behind nothing but traces of footprints leading into the forest and vanishing as if swallowed by the earth itself. Scholars and doctors from distant cities attempted to investigate, hoping to unravel the mystery with reason and science, yet every attempt ended in failure. No medicine, no potion, no explanation could account for the phenomenon. Even the land surrounding the mansion seemed complicit in the sisters' secret. Animals behaved oddly in the vicinity. Dogs would howl and refuse to enter the shadow of the estate, horses would shy violently at unseen threats, and birds would avoid the trees that loomed over the mansion like sentinels. The villagers themselves noticed strange patterns, fog that rolled in thick and fast over the hills, masking the mansion from view, or sudden gusts of wind that carried whispers that sounded almost like voices, calling names in languages no one recognized. Those who dared linger in the fields after dusk often felt watched, as though unseen eyes followed their every movement, and a cold dread would settle in their bones. The mansion's interiors were said to be as strange as its exterior. Those few who glimpsed inside spoke of rooms filled with mirrors that did not reflect the present but scenes from decades past, showing the sisters in identical positio, performing the same gestures they now performed in real time. Candles burned without smoke, shadows clung to walls in shapes that suggested movement, and portraits adorned the hallways, each depicting the sisters at different ages, yet always unchanged. Some paintings were rumored to shift subtly when unobserved, the eyes of the subjects following intruders, judging, remembering. Every corner of the house seemed alive, as if the mansion itself were an extension of the sisters, a living entity created to preserve them and their secrets. As the years passed, stories of the sisters became legend. The villagers spoke of them in tones reserved for the sacred or the damned, neither fully believing nor daring to disbelieve. Every newcomer to the town was warned to stay away from the mansion, yet every newcomer felt a strange, irresistible pull toward it, a curiosity they could not name or resist. Even the local clergy had commented on the mansion, hinting that it was a place untouched by God's hand, a site of power and corruption beyond mortal comprehension. And so the mansion stood, isolated and eternal, much like the sisters themselves. It became a place of stories whispered by candlelight, tales that grew more elaborate with each telling, tales of 7 women who could not be aged, who could not be understood, who could not be stopped. The allure of the sisters was not merely their beauty or their youth. It was something deeper, something primal, that touched the very core of human fear and fascination. To gaze upon them was to confront the impossible, to witness a truth that the mind refused to accept. Were they blessed? Were they cursed? Or were they something else entirely, something that walked between worlds, touching both life and death, bending the flow of time to their will? No answer could satisfy the mind, and perhaps that was precisely the sisters' intent. And so, as the sun dipped behind the Tennessee hills, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the land, the mansion glowed faintly, its windows like eyes observing the world beyond. The 7 sisters moved within, silent, deliberate, eternal. They were unseen yet present, untouched yet potent. And the villagers, both terrified and enthralled, would tell the story over and over, generations passing before the next dared approach the mansion, each drawn by the same irresistible curiosity that had ensnared so many before. In 1838, the legend of the 7 sisters had only begun, yet it already loomed over Tennessee like a shadow that would not fade. Their story was one of beauty and horror intertwined, a tale that tested the boundaries of reason, a mystery that whispered to every heart daring enough to listen. And the mansion, perched atop the hill, watched patiently, holding the sisters' secret and waiting for the day when the world might be ready or foolish enough to understand what it truly meant to never age. As the whispers of the 7 sisters spread through Tennessee, curiosity turned into obsession for some. Travelers came from distant towns, merchants paused in their journeys, and even learned men, doctors and scholars, felt compelled to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Each new visitor arrived with a different motive. Some sought to unravel the mystery with reason, others craved the thrill of danger, and a few, perhaps foolishly, were drawn by greed, hoping to exploit what they could not comprehend. And yet no one left the mansion unchanged, for the sisters' influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of their estate. The first to approach with intent were local scholars, armed with ink-stained notebooks and telescopes, attempting to observe from the distance. They took careful measurements of the mansion, documented the angles of the windows, the number of candles flickering in the night, even the rhythm of the sisters' nightly routines, if such routines could be said to exist. But even from afar, the mansion seemed to resist scrutiny. Shadows twisted unnaturally. Windows reflected not the scholars' images, but scenes they could not place, and the air around the estate grew heavy, suffused with an almost tangible energy. Notes in their journals became increasingly frantic, lines scribbled over one another, observations mingling with panic as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. One particular scholar, Dr. William Hargrove, arrived with a sense of grim determination. A man of science and logic, he refused to accept legends as truth. He was not a believer in magic or superstition. He believed only in evidence, in facts that could be weighed, measured, and analyzed. Yet, when he first glimpsed the sisters from the top of a distant hill, even he faltered. They were walking in the gardens, their movements so fluid and synchronized it seemed choreographed, as if each step had been rehearsed over centuries. Their dresses shimmered in the afternoon sun, casting light that seemed to bend unnaturally around them, and their laughter drifted across the air, sweet, melodic, yet carrying a note of menace. That prick led the skin. Hargrove spent days observing the mansion from a hidden vantage point, meticulously recording every detail. He noted the uncanny consistency of the sisters' appearances, the way each of them seemed untouched by time. Children who had played near the mansion years prior had grown into adults, yet the sisters remained the same. Their faces were flawless, untouched by the sun, untouched by life itself. The phenomenon was impossible, defying every known law of nature. Even Hargrove, who prided himself on rationality, began to feel the creeping tendrils of doubt, a sensation that gnawed at the edges of his mind. Unable to contain his curiosity, Hargrove finally decided to enter the mansion. He approached the wrought iron gates at twilight, his heart pounding in his chest as the wind whispered through the twisted branches of the surrounding forest. The gates, engraved with strange symbols and patterns, swung open as though welcoming him or warning him not to proceed further. Stepping into the grounds, he felt the air shift, heavy and electric, carrying the faint scent of something ancient and metallic. The gardens were immaculate, yet eerily silent, as if the flora itself obeyed some unspoken command. Roses bloomed in impossible profusion, their petals untouched by frost or rot, and ivy clung to the walls in perfect patterns, as if arranged by a meticulous hand. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was even more perplexing. Candles burned with a steady flame, casting long shadows that danced across the walls as if alive. Mirrors lined the hallways, yet they did not reflect the present. Instead, Hargrove saw images of the past, the sisters at a ball decades ago, orphing under chandeliers that no longer hung in any ballroom. The images shifted subtly, showing events that had not yet occurred, or perhaps never would. He found jars of herbs and powders arranged neatly on shelves, their purpose unknown, exuding a pungent aroma that made the hair on his arm stand on end. The walls were etched with symbols and runes, intricate and deliberate, suggesting rituals beyond the comprehension of any ordinary scholar. Hargrove's journal entries from that night convey both fascination and terror. He described rooms frozen in time, furniture covered in dust yet untouched by decay. There were portraits of the sisters, each painted decades apart, yet each sister looked identical, unchanged by the years. The eyes in the portrait seemed to follow him, unblinking and accusatory. He noted that the sisters' presence could be felt even when they were not visible, a weight pressing down on the chest, a sense of being observed and judged. The mansion was not merely a home, it was a vessel, a repository of something ancient and unearthly, and the sisters were the guardians of its secret. The villagers' stories offered tantalizing hints about how the sisters maintained their eternal youth. Some claimed that deep in the forest surrounding the mansion flowed a hidden spring, its waters shimmering with an otherworldly light. Those who drank from it allegedly became ageless, their bodies and faces preserved as though frozen in time. Others whispered of rituals performed under the moon, chants spoken in languages no mortal could understand, sacrifices both subtle and terrible. Travelers who tried to corroborate these tales often returned pale and haunted, aching of lights in the forest that moved against the wind, of voices that called their names when no one was there, and of shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long, reaching for them even when they fled. Even the sisters' interactions with the outside world were strange and unsettling. Letters sent to merchants or officials were written in flawless, elegant handwriting, yet the ink never faded. The paper never yellowed. Visitors who were permitted brief entry into the mansion reported conversations that were oddly hypnotic, leaving them disoriented and sometimes unable to recall key details. Merchants often left offerings or gifts seeking favor or protection, and sometimes received goods of remarkable quality in return, fabrics that shimmered with unnatural brilliance, perfumes whose scents lingered for days without diminishing. It became clear that the sisters were not merely ageless, they wielded influence over time and nature itself, shaping events and objects in ways that defied reason. Hargrove became increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth. Night after night, he returned to the mansion, documenting what he saw with painstaking detail. He observed the sisters performing what appeared to be a nightly ritual in the main hall, moving in a circle, chanting softly, their hands lifted toward the ceiling as if drawing power from some unseen source. Candles flickered and shadows deepened around them, yet they seemed untouched by fatigue or time. Their eyes glimmered with knowledge too vast for any mortal to comprehend, and Hargrove felt a creeping certainty that they understood him as much as he sought to understand them. Every attempt to intervene or disrupt the ritual was met with subtle resistance. The wind would shift, doors would slam, or faint whispers would echo in his mind, warning him away. Despite the danger, Hargrove pressed on, hoping to capture evidence that could explain their immortality. He noted that each sister had a distinct presence, a unique energy that radiated outward. Isabel's gaze seemed to pierce the soul, revealing hidden fears. Lillian's laughter carried a sharpness that unsettled even the bravest men. Margaret's calm presence was simultaneously comforting and terrifying, as if her very stillness could command life or death. The other sisters each possessed similar traits, beauty intertwined with power, charm laced with menace. They were not merely living beings, they were embodiments of something far greater, a force both alluring and deadly. As the days turned into weeks, Hargrove began to uncover hints of the mansion's history. He discovered old journals, carefully hidden in a secret compartment behind a fireplace, chronicling decades of the sisters' lives. The entries were meticulous, detailing experiments, observations, and interactions with travelers and townspeople. Yet even these writings could not explain the core mystery. The sisters recorded events with precision, yet their own ages remained unchanged. Each entry suggested knowledge and skill far beyond what should be possible, blending science, mysticism, and something darker still. Hargrove's rational mind struggled to comprehend the convergence of these forces. Outside, the village began to notice the effects of the sisters' growing reputation. Farmers reported livestock disappearing, often without a trace. Children spoke of shadows. Moving independently in the woods, figures glimpsed out of the corner of the eye that vanished when looked at directly. The wind carried whispers, sometimes friendly, sometimes mocking, always unsettling. Even the local authorities, though skeptical, began to tread carefully around the mansion, unwilling to provoke a power they could not understand. The legend of the Seven Sisters had become more than rumor. It had transformed into a palpable force, a presence that shaped the lives of everyone in the surrounding region. Hargrove's fascination reached its peak one stormy night. Lightning illuminated the mansion in stark flashes, revealing the sisters in the windows, moving as if the storm itself were a dance partner. Rain splashed against the grounds, yet the mansion and its gardens remained pristine, untouched by the elements. Hargrove recorded every detail, desperate to capture the impossible, to reconcile what he saw with the limits of reason. But no matter how closely he observed, no explanation emerged. The sisters were eternal, their rituals precise, their power undeniable. And Hargrove realized that the deeper he delved, the more he became a part of the story. A pawn in a mystery that spanned generations, a witness to something that may never be fully understood. The mansion, the sisters, the hidden rituals, the ethereal glow of the estate, all of it combined to create a phenomenon that defied logic. And for Hargrove, as for every traveler, scholar or villager who dared approach, the truth remained tantalizingly close, yet impossibly out of reach. The sisters' immortality was not merely a physical state, it was a force that shaped the very fabric of their surrounding. Bending reality to maintain their secret. To observe them was to confront the impossible, and to confront the impossible was to acknowledge the limits of human understanding. In time, Hargrove left the mansion, but he was not the same man who had arrived. His journals, filled with meticulous observations and frenzied notes, became part of the growing legend, though few dared read them aloud. Travelers told stories of what they had seen and heard, each account more elaborate than the last, yet none could fully explain the sisters' secret. The mansion continued to glow at night. The sisters moved through their gardens with eternal grace, and the villagers learned, in their own ways, that some mysteries were meant not to be solved but to endure. The legend of the seven sisters had taken root, and the forest, the wind, and the mansion itself became extensions of their ageless presence, ensuring that the world beyond the estate would never forget, or fully understand, the women who refused to age. As the legend of the seven sisters spread throughout Tennessee, the townspeople's initial curiosity slowly transformed into fear. At first, they whispered only in private, careful not to draw attention to themselves, but over time the whispers became conversations held in hushed tones by the firelight in the backrooms of taverns and along the dusty streets of the village. The sisters were no longer merely figures of beauty and fascination, they were a force of power, a presence that pressed into the consciousness of everyone who lived nearby. To speak their names aloud was to acknowledge the impossible, and even that acknowledgement seemed to carry consequences. Children who played too close to the mansion returned home pale and withdrawn, their eyes haunted by something they could not name. Livestock vanished overnight, and travelers who lingered too long in the hills near the mansion sometimes failed to return at all. Fear, as much as curiosity, had taken root in the hearts of the villagers. Stories began to circulate of encounters with the sisters that went beyond mere observation. Farmers claimed that when they passed near the estate at dusk, shadows moved independently, separating from the natural forms of trees and rocks. They swore that these shadows followed them for miles, disappearing only when the mansion itself was out of sight. One particularly chilling account came from a man named Thomas Galloway, who had been tending his fields when he glimpsed one of the sisters standing at the edge of the tree line. She did not move but stared directly at him, her silver eyes glinting in the twilight. Thomas later claimed that he felt frozen in place, unable to turn or flee, and that for a long moment it seemed as if time itself had slowed. When he finally broke free of the gaze and ran home, he was shivering uncontrollably, convinced that something had followed him, though no one saw it. The more these stories spread, the more the mansion's presence seemed to grow in the villagers' collective imagination. Every small misfortune, a missing cow, a sudden illness, a child's nightmare, was attributed, at least in part, to the sisters' influence. Those who dared speak of the sisters' power too loudly often experienced strange accidents. A horse bolted unexpectedly, a wagon wheel snapped, or a fire erupted in the hearth without warning. Some claimed the sea were mere coincidences, but in a town steeped in superstition, no one could ignore the patterns. Even the clergy, though hesitant to embrace such tales, offered prayers and warnings, urging parishioners to keep their distance, warning that the sisters' beauty was only a mask for a power beyond human comprehension. Despite the fear, there were those who sought to challenge the sisters. Brave or reckless men ventured into the estate, hoping to confront them, but the accounts that returned, or trickled back through rumor, were chilling. One man, a traveling scholar, claimed he saw the sisters gathered in the main hall under the pale light of 100 candles. They moved in perfect unison, their hands raised, chanting in a language he did not recognize. Shadows shifted unnaturally around them, twisting into forms that resembled human figures and yet moved with the fluidity of smoke. When he attempted to speak, his voice caught in his throat, and he fled the mansion in terror. By the time he reached the village, he had aged visibly, his hair streaked with grey, his face gaunt, as if the mansion itself had drained years from his life in a single night. The villagers noticed other signs of the sisters' influence as well. Pets became uneasy near the estate, refusing to enter its grounds or yelping at shadows invisible to their owners. Wild animals behaved oddly, gathering near the perimeter of the mansion and retreating abruptly whenever a sister appeared. Even the weather seemed to obey some unseen pattern. Fog rolled in thick and fast, masking the mansion from view, while sudden gusts of wind carried whispers and laughter that no one could identify. There were nights when the forest surrounding the estate would tremble with a sound like distant drums or chanting, though no person was ever found responsible. In every sense, the mansion had become a domain separate from the natural world, a space where ordinary rules of reality no longer applied. The sisters themselves were the center of this growing dread. Their presence was magnetic, their beauty hypnotic, and their power undeniable. Isabel, the eldest, was said to possess a gaze that could pierce the soul. Those who met her eyes often described a sensation as if their secrets, fears, and sins were laid bare before her. Lillian's laughter, sweet and melodic, carried an undertone that unsettled even the bravest men, a sharpness that hinted at cruelty beneath the surface. Margaret, serene and calm, radiated a quiet authority, as if her mere stillness could bend the will of anyone in her presence. And the remaining 4 sisters, equally striking, each with a distinct aura of dominance and enigma, formed a collective presence that seemed to warp the world around them. Those who encountered them directly described a sense of inevitability, a feeling that the sisters were aware of everything, watching, judging, and shaping reality without effort. It was not only the townspeople who felt the sisters' influence. Travelers from distant regions reported similar experiences. Merchants who stopped in the village on their way to larger towns sometimes took detours to glimpse the mansion from afar. They returned with tales of shadows moving independently, of candlelight flickering unnaturally, of glimpses of figures in the windows that seemed to shift and change when unobserved. Some spoke of hearing spurs in the wind, faint voices calling their names, or speaking words they did not understand. Others reported visions while asleep, dreams filled with strange symbols and rituals, leaving them awake in the night, heart racing, convinced that the sisters' power reached far beyond the estate itself. The local authorities, though skeptical, found themselves constrained by circumstances. Accidents and disappearances were frequent near the mansion, yet no evidence could be produced to explain them. Investigations were inconclusive, and attempts to confront the sisters directly often ended in failure or terror. Laws could not govern forces beyond comprehension, and the mansion became an untouchable landmark, a place feared and respected in equal measure. Over time, the villagers learned a kind of uneasy coexistence. They spoke of the sisters in careful terms, offered small gifts to appease whatever power lingered in the estate, and avoided venturing near the hill at night. It was a form of survival, a recognition that some mysteries were too dangerous to confront directly. Yet even with these precautions, the mansion continued to cast its shadow over the lives of the townspeople. Children would sometimes vanish for hours, returning pale and silent, their eyes wide with fear, speaking only of figures they had seen in the forest. Farmers found their crops failing inexplicably near the hill, while livestock disappeared without trace. Travelers who camped nearby reported being awoken by distant laughter or soft chanting, always feeling watched, always feeling that time itself had slowed around them. The sisters' influence was pervasive, a silent authority that shaped the land and the lives of everyone near it. Among the villagers, a growing sense of dread took root. Superstition evolved into something more tangible, a psychological weight pressing on everyone who lived in the shadow of the mansion. Some began to experience physical symptoms, sudden chills, heart palpitations, unexplained bruises, and nightmares so vivid they could not be distinguished from reality. Local healers and physicians were at a loss, unable to explain the phenomena within the boundaries of known medicine. Even the most skeptical among them began to concede that the mansion was not merely a residence, but a locus of power, its influence extending far beyond its walls. Attempts to document the sisters' existence systematically were met with frustration. Scholars, like Dr. Hargrove, found themselves grappling with phenomena that defied logic. Mirrors in the mansion reflected scenes not of the present but of the past, or perhaps of events yet to come. Portraits of the sisters appeared unchanged over decades, their faces frozen in time while the world outside aged and decayed. Candles burned without smoke, shadows clung to walls in impossible shapes, and faint whispers echoed through empty halls. Every clue raised more questions than it answered, leaving investigators both fascinated and terrified. Even social interactions with the sisters carried danger. Villagers who had dared to approach the mansion, offering gifts or seeking guidance, often returned changed. Some became pale, withdrawn, and haunted, as if a part of their life force had been claimed. Others developed uncanny abilities or knowledge beyond their years, only to find themselves isolated from those who could not understand them. The sisters' influence was not violent in the conventional sense, but it was pervasive and subtle, shaping minds, bending will, and imposing a form of psychological authority that was both seductive and terrifying. Over time, the mansion itself became a symbol, a physical manifestation of the sisters' power. Its gates, etched with strange symbols, became an icon of caution and reverence. Travelers avoided the hill, and villagers treated it with the utmost respect or fear. The surrounding forest, with its twisted trees and dense fog, seemed to act as a protective barrier, keeping outsiders at bay. Even natural phenomena, the wind, the fog, and the patterns of wildlife, appeared to respond to the mansion's presence, as if the estate were alive, an extension of the sisters themselves. By 1838, the legend of the sisters had become inseparable from the village's identity. Their story was told over hearths, in taverns, and in whispered conversations that spanned generations. Parents warned children not to approach the mansion, not simply because it was dangerous, but because it carried a power that could touch the soul. Travelers recorded the tales in journals, and later accounts transformed them into cautionary stories that blurred the line between reality and myth. Yet no matter how much time passed, no one could fully explain or challenge the sisters' existence. They were eternal, untouchable, and ever-present, a force that would endure as long as the mansion itself remained. The villagers learned in a combination of fear and pragmatism that some mysteries were not meant to be solved but to be respected. They observed the mansion from a distance, acknowledged the presence of the seven sisters, and adapted their lives accordingly. And even as generations passed, the mansion remained, and the sisters continued to walk its halls and gardens, their beauty and power unchanged. Their influence persisted, shaping the lives of all who approached, reminding everyone that some secrets are eternal, and that some forces cannot be challenged without consequence. The legend of the sisters as it developed during this period was more than a story. It was a presence, a force, a warning. The mansion and the women who inhabited it were a mirror of humanity's deepest fears, the fear of the unknown, the fear of time slipping away, and the fear that some powers exist beyond the understanding or control of mere mortals. And as the villagers looked up at the mansion on the hill, they understood instinctively that the seven sisters were watching, always watching, and that their influence would linger long after any one life had passed into memory. Over the years, the mansion atop the Tennessee Hill had become more than a landmark. It had become a riddle, an enigma that beckoned scholars, travelers, and the curious alike. Among those drawn to it, few were as determined as Eleanor Whitmore, a young journalist from the nearby city. Unlike the villagers, Eleanor was not afraid. She had grown up on tales of the Seven Sisters, hearing the whispers and warnings, yet instead of retreating, she felt an irresistible pull toward the mansion. The stories that had terrified others stirred something within her, a desire to uncover the truth, to document what had defied explanation for decades. She believed that if she could see the sisters and their ease, Tate for herself, she might unravel the mystery of their immortality, or at least glimpse the reason why the world outside aged while they remained unchanged. Eleanor approached the mansion on a night thick with fog, the moon casting only a faint silver glow that barely illuminated the twisted oaks lining the path. Each step toward the wrought-iron gates felt as though she were walking into another world, one where the rules she had known no longer applied. The gates, adorned with strange symbols, creaked open at her touch, or perhaps of their own accord, and a shiver ran down her spine. Inside the grounds, the air was heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth, roses, and something faintly metallic, an aroma that set her senses on edge. The garden, though overgrown in places, maintained a perfection that seemed unnatural. Flowers bloomed in impossible hues, petals untouched by frost or decay, and vines curled around the mansion as if guided by unseen hands. Inside, the mansion was silent, yet every corner seemed alive. Candles burned steadily without flicker, their flames illuminating hallways lined with mirrors that reflected not the present but other times. Decades passed, perhaps even moments yet to come. Eleanor moved cautiously, her footsteps muffled against the worn wooden floors, her journal clutched tightly in her hands. She paused frequently to document the details around her, the arrangement of furniture frozen in place, the portraits of the sisters that seemed to follow her with their eyes, and the faint, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the walls. It was as if the mansion itself breathed, and Eleanor could feel its rhythm aligning with her own heart. Beat. The deeper she ventured, the more Eleanor realized that the sisters' immortality was not merely a physical anomaly. It was a force that extended to the mansion, to the air, to the very light itself. In the main hall, she discovered remnants of rituals, candles set in precise geometric patterns, small bowls of herbs and powders arranged with meticulous care, and carved symbols etched into the floorboards. The faint scent of incense lingered, though she could not discern when it had last been burned. Eleanor sensed that she was intruding on something sacred, yet she could not stop herself. Every observation she made brought her closer to understanding, though each answer seemed to give birth to 10 more questions. Eleanor's journal captures her mixture of awe and terror. She wrote of mirrors that revealed the sisters as they had appeared decades ago, each reflection more vivid than reality, and of portraits whose eyes seemed to move when unobserved. She described rooms where the temperature shifted without reason, sometimes warm and comforting, other times icy and oppressive. She recorded faint whispers in languages she could not identify, phrases that rose and fell like music, hinting at secrets too profound for mortal comprehension. Yet in all of it, Eleanor remained determined. She believed that if she could witness the sisters' rituals, she might uncover the mechanics of their eternal youth, a knowledge that had eluded countless scholars before her. It was on the third night of her observation that Eleanor finally glimpsed the sisters together in the main hall, performing what could only be described as a ritual of power. They moved in perfect synchrony, their NDS raised toward the ceiling, their voices melding into a soft melodic chant that vibrated through the air. Candles flickered, shadows danced along the walls in shapes that suggested movement independent of their source, and the very air seemed charged with energy. Eleanor felt herself drawn forward, compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination, yet she dared not speak or interfere. It was clear that this ritual, repeated for decades, perhaps centuries, was central to the sisters' power, yet its purpose remained a mystery. The mansion seemed to resist her understanding in other ways as well. Mirrors occasionally reflected spaces that did not exist, hallways led to rooms she had never seen before, and doors opened into areas that shifted subtly with each visit. Eleanor realized that the mansion itself was part of the enigma, a living extension of the sisters' influence. It was designed to confound, to protect, to preserve. She began to suspect that the sisters' immortality was intertwined not only with rituals and mysterious substances, but with the estate itself, its walls, its shadows, even its very foundation. To understand one, she would need to understand all. Eleanor also discovered signs of the sisters' interactions with the outside world. Letters carefully stored in a hidden desk detailed meetings with merchants and scholars from distant towns. The writing was flawless, yet the ink had not aged, the paper was pristine, and the content was astonishingly precise. These letters suggested that the sisters had not been isolated from society entirely, but rather engaged with it on their own terms, maintaining influence over commerce, information, and perhaps even politics. Eleanor marveled at their sophistication. They were not merely ageless women, they were strategic, deliberate, and infinitely aware of the world beyond their estate. Over time, Eleanor noticed subtle patterns that hinted at the secret behind their longevity. Certain herbs were present in nearly every room she entered, their properties unknown to her but clearly significant. Candles were positioned according to precise geometric shapes that might correspond to ritualistic or energetic patterns. And the sisters themselves, though physically untouched by time, exuded an energy that suggested a deeper connection to forces beyond human understanding. Eleanor began to theorize that their immortality was not a simple act of physical preservation, but a combination of natural, mystical, and perhaps alchemical processes honed over decades of careful experimentation. The mansion's influence extended beyond the walls. Eleanor observed changes in the environment surrounding the estate. Fog that rolled in precisely at certain times, shadows that appeared independent of natural light, and the behavior of animals that seemed to respond to unseen cues. She realized that the sisters' power was not confined to their physical forms, but radiated outward, shaping reality around them. To live near the mansion was to exist in a space partially governed by their will, a world where ordinary rules no longer applied. This awareness both thrilled and terrified her. Despite the danger, Eleanor remained relentless. She documented everything meticulously, aware that her findings could provide insight into a mystery that had puzzled generations. Yet the deeper she delved, the more she realized that understanding the sisters fully might be impossible. Their existence was a perfect blend of the natural and the supernatural, a carefully maintained equilibrium that defied conventional logic. Every clue she uncovered led to further questions: the jars of herbs and powders, the etchings in the floorboards, the mirrors reflecting the past, the letters preserved in perfect condition. Nothing could be taken at face value. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle that perhaps could never be completed. Eleanor's observations also revealed the sisters' capacity for subtle manipulation. Visitors often left the mansion disoriented, as if time itself had shifted. Memories became blurred, events seemed to overlap, and the mind struggled to reconcile what had been seen with what could reasonably exist. She realized that the mansion and the sisters were not simply alive in the conventional sense, but existed in a space partially untethered from ordinary time and logic. To witness them was to enter a liminal state, a place between reality and something far older, far more powerful. The more Eleanor documented, the more she understood that the sisters' immortality was only part of their power. Their awareness of the world beyond the estate, their ability to influence events subtly, and their control over the environment all suggested a mastery of forces far beyond human comprehension. They were not merely women preserved against time, they were architects of a reality in which they could exist untouched and unchallenged. To defy them, to interfere, was not only dangerous but perhaps impossible. As Eleanor prepared to leave the mansion, she reflected on everything she had witnessed. The sisters, the estate, the rituals, the letters, and the subtle manipulations of the environment all painted a picture of beings who had transcended ordinary human limitations. They were eternal not only in body but in influence, shaping the world around them while remaining untouched by its passage. And yet, the mansion was not a fortress. It was a living organism, a carefully maintained system that connected them to the forces they had mastered. It was both home and instrument, sanctuary and stage, a place where the sisters' power could flourish without restraint. When Eleanor finally stepped beyond the gates, she realized she had glimpsed only a fraction of the truth. The mansion remained, the sisters remained, and the world outside continued to age while they persisted unchanged. She returned to the village with her journals, filled with observations, sketches, and meticulous notes, but even as she recounted her experiences, she understood that the mystery could not be fully conveyed. The sisters' immortality, their influence, their rituals, these were phenomena that could be observed but never fully comprehended. Forces that demanded respect, awe, and caution. In the years that followed, Eleanor's writings became part of the growing legend. Scholars referenced her observations, travelers recounted her experiences, and the mansion itself continued to loom over the Tennessee hills, eternal and untouchable. The seven sisters, still unaging, continued their rituals, moving through their halls with precision and grace, their power undiminished by time or scrutiny. Their secret remained intact, a combination of cunning, ritual, and forces beyond human understanding, preserved for posterity. And for those who dared approach, the lesson was clear: some mysteries are eternal, some powers untouchable, and some truths are meant only to be witnessed, never fully grasped. The mansion atop the Tennessee hill had long since become a silent sentinel over the surrounding valley, its presence both feared and revered. By the time the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the rolling fields, the mansion seemed to glow faintly, an impossible light that no candle nor lantern could produce. Locals called it a place outside of time, a space where the ordinary rules of the world no longer applied. Travelers avoided the hill after sunset, whispering that those who lingered too long might never return, or if they did, return changed, carrying a mark invisible to the eye but indelible upon the soul. The seven sisters had become a legend not only in the village but across the region, a tale passed down from parent to child, each recounting more chilling than the last. And yet, despite generations of fear and rumor, the sisters themselves remained as enigmatic and untouchable as ever, their beauty frozen, their movements precise, and their influence undiminished. It was said that even the winds respected the mansion. On some nights a breeze would sweep through the valley, carrying a faint melody, an unearthly harmony that seemed to emanate from the house itself. Those who heard it described a sensation that was at once comforting and unnerving, as if invisible hands were guiding them, both inviting and warning. Animals reacted similarly, their instincts attuned to a presence beyond the comprehension of humankind. Dogs refused to approach the mansion, horses shied violently, and birds would circle the perimeter repeatedly, never landing. Even the forest seemed alive, its twisted oaks and thick underbrush forming a natural barrier, as if the land itself were complicit in preserving the sisters' secret. The mansion's architecture further reinforced this sense of otherworldly power. Its tall windows reflected light in unnatural ways, catching the setting sun and scattering it across the valley in shimmering patterns. The wrought iron gates bore intricate symbols whose meaning had long been lost to time, yet whose presence carried a subtle command, a warning to the uninitiated, and a recognition for those who understood the rules of this hidden realm. Within the mansion, halls stretched longer than reason would allow. Mirrors reflected not the present, but events past, and perhaps even future. And candles burned with a steady flame that produced neither smoke nor wax drippings. The air inside was thick yet clean, charged with an energy that could be felt in the chest, an almost magnetic force that drew visitors forward even as it warned them to remain still. Many had tried to penetrate the sisters' mystery over the years. Scholars, auras, and travelers had ventured into the mansion, hoping to uncover the secret of their immortality. Few returned unscathed. Those who did spoke of visions that could not be explained, shadows moving independently, whispers in languages unknown, and glimpses of the sisters performing rituals that defied the laws of nature. One such scholar, a man named Dr. Hargrove, had attempted to chart the mansion's hallways, only to find that they shifted in ways that made his maps useless within minutes. Rooms that had appeared empty moments before would suddenly contain objects or furniture he had not seen, and mirrors reflected scenes from decades ago, the sisters unchanged, unaging, eternal. These visitors quickly realized that the mansion was not merely a house, but a living entity, one that existed in concert with the sisters, a symbiotic relationship that could not be disentangled. Eleanor Whitmore, the journalist who had dared to chronicle her own journey inside the mansion, understood this perhaps better than anyone. Her observations revealed that the sisters' immortality was not simply a matter of appearance. Their presence seemed to manipulate reality itself, shaping the environment, bending time, and subtly influencing those who came near. Candles, herbs, geometric patterns etched into floors, and mirrors were all parts of an intricate system, a lattice of energy that sustained not only the sisters' youth, but their power over the mansion and the surrounding land. The more Eleanor observed, the more she realized that every detail had a purpose, that nothing within the mansion was arbitrary. The sisters were architects, engineers, and sorceresses of an existence that extended far beyond ordinary human perception. Even the simplest interactions with the sisters were laden with power. Villagers who brought gifts or sought advice often left visibly changed. Some developed pallor, anxiety, or an unshakable sense of foreboding. Others experienced subtle shifts in perception, noticing things others could not. The sisters did not need to speak to exert influence. Their mere presence was sufficient. Isabel's gaze could reveal secrets buried in the depths of the human soul. Lillian's laughter could unsettle the most composed minds, and Margaret's stillness could command obedience without a word. The remaining 4 sisters possessed similar abilities, each uniquely attuned to manipulating perception, emotion, and even the flow of time itself. Over decades, the mansion and the sisters became inseparable in legend. Travelers spoke of the estate as if it were a living organism, breathing, observing, and reacting to those who approached. Roads were avoided and nights were spent in vigilance, with townspeople warning one another to stay indoors when the wind carried strange melodies from the hill. Some daring souls attempted to spend the night on the grounds, only to awaken disoriented, often miles away from where they had lain, their memory of the hours incomplete. Those who survived these encounters emerged changed, their eyes haunted, their understanding of reality subtly shifted. The sisters' power was not only a matter of life and death, it was an existential force that reshaped the boundaries of human perception. Despite their fearsome reputation, the sisters were not merely malevolent. Observers noted moments of kindness or curiosity, small gestures that hinted at awareness and intelligence beyond simple cruelty. Villagers who respected the mansion, who brought offerings and acknowledged its presence without challenge, sometimes found themselves aided in subtle ways. Livestock returned, crops grew in abundance, and illness was alleviated. Yet this kindness was never guaranteed, and always came with the reminder that the sisters' favor was as much a measure of wisdom as of power. Those who sought to manipulate, deceive, or challenge them invariably met with misfortune, their lives subtly rearranged to remind them of their place in the hierarchy of the mansion. Eleanor's chronicles suggest that the sisters' longevity was intertwined not only with the mansion, but with a network of rituals and observations designed to harmonize with natural and supernatural forces. Herbs, geometric patterns, precise timing of candles, and even the alignment of mirrors all contributed to a delicate balance that preserved their youth and extended their influence. Every act within the mansion was deliberate, a choreography refined over decades, if not centuries, creating a system that was as precise as it was enigmatic. To interfere with it would be to invite catastrophe. To observe it was to glimpse forces that defied comprehension. In time, even the scholars and journalists who had dared to investigate understood that the mansion and the sisters existed in a realm partially detached from ordinary reality. Mirrors, shadows, and whispers were not illusions. They were extensions of a power that shaped the environment, the perception of time, and even the thoughts of those who entered the estate. Visitors quickly recognized the limitatio. Ends of human understanding. To see was not to know, to hear was not to comprehend, and to touch was to risk consequences beyond imagination. The sisters' immortality was thus inseparable from the mansion itself, a complex interplay of ritual, observation, and perhaps forces older than any mortal mind could conceive. Generations passed, yet the mansion endured. Children grew into adults, elders passed into memory, and the valley itself aged while the sisters remained untouched. The mansion's glow continued to pierce the night, a signal to those near and far that the seven sisters were ever present, ever watching. The legend evolved, incorporating new observations, dreams, and fears, but at its core, the truth remained constant. The sisters were ageless, their power absolute, and the mansion was a living repository of forces beyond comprehension. It became a warning, a challenge, and a marvel all at once, a place that existed on the border between reality and something far older, far more enduring. Even today, travelers claim glimpses of the mansion's candles flickering in the distance, shadows moving where none should be, and faint laughter drifting on the wind. Some swear the sisters roam the forests, invisible yet palpable, their presence guiding fate or punishing curiosity. Scholars continue to debate their existence. Historians attempt to uncover records, and the estate remains a locus of fascination and terror. Yet no matter how much time passes, the mansion stands and the sisters remain, untouched by years, unbound by mortality, eternal in a world that continues to age around them. The mansion on the Tennessee Hill is more than a building, and the sisters are more than women. They are forces, constants in a shifting world, embodiments of beauty, power, and the incomprehensible. To witness them is to confront the impossible, to touch the edges of human understanding and feel how small and fleeting life truly is. Their secret is preserved not only in ritual but in the very fabric of the land, in the shadows of the oaks, in the fog that rolls down the valley, and in the whispers carried by the wind. They are untouchable, unaging, eternal. And as long as the mansion stands, so too does their story, a macabre mystery that continues to enthrall, terrify, and mesmerize all who dare to look too closely. Even as generations pass and the modern world encroaches, the mansion remains, timeless and silent, a sentinel over its secrets. The seven sisters are still there, in the halls, in the gardens, in the shadows. They move with the grace of those untouched by mortality, their eyes observing, their laughter carrying the weight of centuries. For those who understand, the mansion is both a warning and a marvel. Some mysteries are eternal, some powers untouchable, and some truths are meant only to be witnessed, never fully understood. And so, the legend of the seven sisters endures, their presence etched into the land, their story whispered on the wind, a chilling reminder that time itself can be bent, manipulated, and preserved by those who have learned the secrets the world cannot fathom.